For decades, the migration story out of West Africa followed a single predictable direction. Young people left. They left for Europe on dangerous boats across the Mediterranean. They left for the Gulf on contract labor schemes. They left for Paris, for Brussels, for anywhere that offered an escape from a future that felt permanently closed at home. That direction is starting to reverse. Right now, young engineers, agricultural scientists, software developers, and skilled tradespeople from across the African continent are watching Burkina Faso with an intensity that nobody predicted 3 years ago. Some are returning home from the diaspora. Some are relocating from neighboring countries. Some are simply choosing to stay, for the first time, instead of planning their exit. The question driving all of this is simple. What changed? This is the story of why thousands of young Africans are suddenly looking toward a country the rest of the world still calls one of the most dangerous on earth. To understand why this shift matters, you need to understand the calculation that shaped an entire generation of young West Africans. For 60 years, the math was brutal and consistent. Stay home, and you inherited a country with barely 3,000 kilometers of paved roads built over 6 decades of independence. Stay home, and you entered a job market where the formal economy could absorb only a fraction of each year's graduating class. Stay home, and you watched your nation's gold, cotton, and agricultural output get exported as raw commodities, processed abroad and sold back at a markup nobody in your village could afford. Stay home, and even with a university degree, you might wait years for an opportunity that matched your training. Leave. And at least there was a chance at a construction job in Europe, a chance at a service position in the Gulf, a chance at remittance income that could support family back home, even if it meant a life of underemployment far from everything familiar. This calculation drove one of the largest sustained outflows of young talent in modern African history. Engineers trained at public expense left to drive taxis abroad. Agricultural graduates left to work in warehouses thousands of kilometers from the farmland they were trained to improve. It was not laziness or lack of ambition. It was rational decision-making in response to a structural reality that offered almost no alternative. The shift began with something almost nobody outside Burkina Faso noticed at first: jobs. Not symbolic jobs, not government make-work programs. Real, large-scale employment opportunities tied to actual national construction. When Ibrahim Traoré launched the Agropastoral and Fisheries Offensive, it created agricultural engineering positions, irrigation technician roles, and agronomy jobs at a scale the country had never offered before. The motorbikes provided to transfer agricultural engineers out of air-conditioned capital offices and into rural cooperatives were not just transportation, they were a signal. The government needed trained professionals in the field, immediately, at scale, with real responsibility attached. When the Faso Mayabo road building initiative launched, it required surveyors, equipment operators, civil engineers, and project managers across dozens of simultaneous construction sites. 900 pieces of heavy machinery do not operate themselves. 5,000 kilometers of annual road paving targets do not get met without thousands of trained technical workers. When the Burkina Business Center began rising in Ouagadougou, a 35-story tower alongside 14 additional buildings, it created architecture, structural engineering, and project management positions that simply did not exist in the country 18 months earlier. 300 direct jobs and more than 1,000 indirect jobs from that project alone. When the rice, wheat, tomato, and cashew processing factories scaled up, they needed food scientists, quality control technicians, mechanical engineers, and factory managers. Each of these was not a single job opening. It was a category of employment that had barely existed in Burkina Faso before, suddenly appearing at scale, all at once, across the entire country. Word travels fast among diaspora communities, and what Burkinabe professionals abroad started noticing was specific and concrete. Engineers who had left for jobs in France, Côte d'Ivoire, or the Gulf began hearing from family members about real opportunities opening up at home. Not vague promises, but actual hiring at the Burkindi Tower construction site, at the Kamsila rice facility, at the irrigation projects scaling across the Bagre and Die perimeters. Agricultural scientists in the diaspora began watching the wheat campaign with professional curiosity. A country growing wheat at scale in the Sahel, against 60 years of expert consensus that it was climatically impossible, is the kind of project that draws serious agronomists who want to be part of solving a problem nobody else has solved. Software developers and fintech professionals in the diaspora started noticing something else entirely. A growing cluster of office space in Ouagadougou's commercial districts filling up with young Burkinabe developers, cybersecurity engineers, and entrepreneurs building payment systems and digital platforms. Spaces that did not exist as serious professional ecosystems just a few years earlier were suddenly hosting fintech innovators working on locally driven software solutions. For a young software engineer working a mid-level job abroad, the calculation started to shift. Abroad, stable but capped opportunity in an oversaturated market. Home, ground floor opportunity in a digital ecosystem being built from scratch, with genuine room to lead rather than simply participate. One of the most unexpected draws for young Africans has been something almost no analyst predicted: the VDP agricultural training program. When Traoré created the dual-mandate militia model, soldiers who secure farmland and then farm it themselves, he inadvertently created one of the most rigorous practical skills training programs in the region. As of April 2026, over 4,600 agricultural VDPs, including hundreds of women, have graduated from a program that fuses agronomic science with military discipline. This is not symbolic training. Graduates leave with genuine expertise in irrigation management, crop science, and mechanized farming skills that are immediately employable across the rapidly expanding agricultural sector. For young people in neighboring countries facing the same lack of formal opportunity that has driven migration for decades, a program that delivers real technical skills, national service, and a pathway into a growing agricultural economy is an unusually attractive proposition. Reports of interest from young people in Mali and Niger, fellow members of the Alliance of Sahel States, about similar training models speak to how unusual this combination is. A program built initially for domestic security and food production purposes is becoming a regional model for technical education that young Africans are actively seeking out. Education infrastructure is following the same trajectory as everything else in this transformation. The University Hospital Center of Gawa, already past the 54% execution mark and targeting completion by 2026, represents a deliberate decentralization strategy. For generations, advanced medical training and serious specialized education were concentrated almost entirely in the capital. Young people from regional areas who wanted serious professional training had to relocate to Ouagadougou or leave the country entirely. The Gawa facility, along with land designated for a future university near the Esquire City satellite development and a planned university connected to the Burkina Business Center, signals a strategy of building educational capacity across multiple regions simultaneously, rather than concentrating it permanently in one city. For families considering whether to send their children abroad for university education, historically a major driver of permanent emigration, since students who study abroad frequently do not return, the calculation is shifting. If quality technical and professional education is becoming available domestically, in multiple regional centers, the strongest historical pipeline toward permanent emigration begins to narrow. Strip away the macroeconomic analysis and listen to what is actually driving individual decisions. Young agricultural workers participating in the agro-pastoral offensive describe a sense of direct, visible contribution that is rare in large bureaucratic economies. A farmer who receives a free tractor, free fertilizer, and free irrigation access, and then sees a 6-ton per hectare rice harvest, experiences a tangible connection between national policy and personal outcome that is unusual anywhere in the world, let alone in a country that spent 6 decades being told it could not feed itself. Construction workers on the Faso-Mayabo road projects describe pride in seeing a finished, modern street appear in their own neighborhood within months, built with materials and labor they personally contributed to. Students who molded pavement bricks during school vacations, children who are now young adults, describe a formative experience of nation-building that shaped their sense of civic identity. This is fundamentally a psychological shift as much as an economic one. A generation that grew up watching foreign contractors build roads they were not allowed to work on is now a generation that is laying the asphalt themselves. That difference in lived experience is not something a salary figure alone can capture, but it is exactly the kind of difference that determines whether a young person plans their future around staying or leaving. Burkina Faso is not just retaining its own youth, it is beginning to attract young professionals from neighboring countries as well. As Mali and Niger study the Faso-Mayabo road-building model and the broader sovereignty-focused development approach, as members of the Alliance of Sahel States, young engineers and technical professionals from those countries are increasingly looking at Burkina Faso as a place where this model is furthest along and most visibly proven. Niger recorded GDP growth of around 7% in 2025 during its own wave of infrastructure development, suggesting the broader Sahelian region is entering a period where domestic resource-funded development is becoming a credible alternative to the foreign dependency model that previously defined the region's economic prospects. For a young professional anywhere in the broader Sahel weighing options, Burkina Faso increasingly represents the most advanced laboratory for this new development approach, the place where food sovereignty, infrastructure sovereignty, and energy ambitions are furthest along and most concretely demonstrated. That makes it an attractive destination not just for Burkina Faso citizens but for ambitious young Africans from across the region who want to be part of building something rather than simply working within an inherited system. Traoré has been explicit and consistent in framing this entire transformation as fundamentally a project for and about young people. His repeated emphasis on sovereignty, food sovereignty, energy sovereignty, technological sovereignty is consistently framed not as abstract nationalism, but as the precondition for young Burkinabe people to build careers and lives without being forced into the historical pattern of emigration. Those who beg are always at the bottom. If we spend our time asking for food or going to the ends of the earth, we'll always be at the bottom. That statement, originally made in the context of food sovereignty, captures the broader philosophy driving the youth engagement strategy across every sector. The goal is not simply economic growth in the abstract. It is specifically constructing a domestic economy with enough scale, opportunity, and dignity that young Burkinabe people no longer face the brutal calculation that drove previous generations toward dangerous migration routes and permanent emigration. The mobilization of students, children, and young volunteers throughout Faso Mayobo in the broader national rebuilding effort is not incidental. It is a deliberate strategy to give an entire generation a direct, hands-on stake in the nation's reconstruction from the very beginning, so that staying home does not feel like settling for less, but like participating in something genuinely significant. For 60 years, the dominant story of young West Africans was departure, boats across the Mediterranean, contract labor in the Gulf, permanent relocation to Paris, to Brussels, to anywhere that offered what home could not. That story is not over. Migration pressures across the region remain real and significant. But something genuinely new is happening in Burkina Faso, and young Africans across the continent are noticing it. A rice processing facility employing hundreds of trained technicians. A road building program creating thousands of construction and engineering jobs at a pace 100 times the historical rate. A 35-story tower rising in the capital, generating architecture and project management positions that did not exist 18 months earlier. A digital ecosystem of fintech and software developers building genuine professional careers in Ouagadougou rather than abroad. An agricultural training program graduating thousands of young technicians with real, employable skills. A wheat campaign, an apple orchard, a pineapple processing plant, a cashew factory employing hundreds of women, each one a category of professional opportunity that simply did not exist at scale in this country a few years ago. None of it built on foreign loans. None of it built on foreign contractors importing their own workforce and leaving local talent on the margins. All of it built specifically with Burkinabe hands, which means all of it specifically requires Burkinabe professionals, technicians, engineers, and skilled workers to build, operate, and sustain. That is the answer to the question this story opened with. Why are thousands of young Africans suddenly looking toward Burkina Faso? Because for the first time in living memory, staying home in this part of the Sahel does not mean choosing a smaller future. It means choosing to build the future itself. There is a dimension to this youth movement that deserves its own attention. Young women, across nearly every sector of Burkina Faso's transformation, women are not occupying the margins. They are occupying the center. The SN Anna Trans Cashew Processing Facility in Bobo Dioulasso runs with a workforce that is over 90% women, processing 5,000 tons of cashew apples annually into concentrate, juice, wine, vinegar, and ethanol. Among the 4,600 agricultural VDPs who have graduated through April 2026, hundreds are women who completed the same rigorous training fusing agronomic science with military discipline as their male counterparts. Young women in the diaspora who once saw limited professional pathways back home are now watching a country where a cashew factory floor, a rice processing facility, and an agricultural cooperative all represent genuine employment with real technical responsibility attached. This matters enormously for the broader migration calculation, because historically, opportunities for young women in West African economies have often been even more constrained than for young men, pushing many toward informal labor markets abroad with limited protection or advancement. A factory floor that is 90% women, generating real wages and real skills, represents a structural shift that young women across the region are tracking closely. When a Burkinabe woman writes home to family in Mali or Côte d'Ivoire describing stable factory work, technical training, and a clear sense of contributing to something larger than herself, that message travels through networks that shape thousands of individual decisions about where to build a life. One of the quieter but most significant shifts happening beneath the headline mega-projects is the formalization of economic activity that used to exist entirely outside any structured system. For decades, much of Burkina Faso's young workforce operated in the informal economy: street vending, small-scale subsistence farming, unregistered transport services, casual day labor with no contracts, no benefits, and no path toward anything larger. The scale of national mobilization under Faso Mayabo and the agro-pastoral offensive is gradually pulling segments of that informal activity into structured, documented employment. A young man who previously worked unregistered day labor jobs around Ouagadougou can now find consistent work on a Faso Mayabo road crew, with defined hours, defined responsibilities, and skills training provided by military engineers. A young woman who previously sold produce informally at a roadside stand can now find work inside a processing facility with stable wages and the kind of employment history that makes future opportunities easier to access. This formalization process does not show up dramatically in any single statistic, but it represents one of the most important long-term shifts for young people deciding whether their country offers a structured path forward or only informal survival. Economists studying labor markets across the Sahel have long identified this informal to formal transition as one of the most difficult to achieve through policy alone. It typically requires sustained large-scale investment, sufficient to absorb workers at meaningful volume, sustained over years rather than a single project cycle. Burkina Faso's simultaneous mobilization across agriculture, construction, processing, and digital sectors is creating exactly that kind of sustained absorption capacity. And young people are noticing that the nature of available work itself is changing, not just its quantity. For 60 years, the dominant story of young West Africans was departure: boats across the Mediterranean, contract labor in the Gulf, permanent relocation to Paris, to Brussels, to anywhere that offered what home could not. That story is not over. Migration pressures across the region remain real and significant. But something genuinely new is happening in Burkina Faso, and young Africans across the continent are noticing it. A rice processing facility employing hundreds of trained technicians. A road-building program creating thousands of construction and engineering jobs at a pace 100 times the historical rate. A 35-story tower rising in the capital, generating architecture and project management positions that did not exist 18 months earlier. A digital ecosystem of fintech and software developers building genuine professional careers in Ouagadougou rather than abroad. An agricultural training program graduating thousands of young technicians with real employable skills. A wheat campaign, an apple orchard, a pineapple processing plant, a cashew factory employing hundreds of women, each one a category of professional opportunity that simply did not exist at scale in this country a few years ago. None of it built on foreign loans. None of it built on foreign contractors importing their own workforce and leaving local talent on the margins. All of it built specifically with Burkinabe hands, which means all of it specifically requires Burkinabe professionals, technicians, engineers, and skilled workers to build, operate, and sustain. That is the answer to the question this story opened with. Why are thousands of young Africans suddenly looking toward Burkina Faso? Because for the first time in living memory, staying home in this part of the Sahel does not mean choosing a smaller future. It means choosing to build the future itself.